table, but the question I do get a lot is how do you, how's the best way, what's the easiest way to work with Carnegie Title? And honestly, this is it. If you want to work with us, the easiest, simplest way would be to use one of our preferred attorneys, people that we've vetted and worked with on countless transactions, who we know that we confident to get you to the closing table and get you your check and have you ring in that bell as quickly as possible. So, so that's that's a general overview of what we're going to cover today. So if anybody has any questions, write them down, save them to the end, and then, like I said, we'll all kind of get together. So we're going to have Susanna go first, and she's going to discuss as is, right? What does that mean for everybody? So
as is, very, very scary to us as attorneys. Okay, we do not like that. Okay, so I've been doing this about 30 years, and every single time I get a new seller, the first words out of his or her mouth, that initial phone call conversation is, by the way, I'm selling as is. I price my house to sell as is. There's nothing wrong with my house. And you can tell that buyer that I'm not doing it. Okay, so that's always the first conversation I have with the seller. Buyer, right? First conversation with the buyer is, well, I offer X, but if there's something wrong with the house, the seller has to fix it, right? I don't have to buy the house if there's something wrong with the house. Okay, so right there, there's polar opposites. What the seller feels, what the buyer feels. The seller's house to the seller is always a mansion. It's perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. And to the buyer, well, it's a scary endeavor. You're going to be their home, and they want to know what they're walking into. So now fast forward to this crazy market. Who would have thunk it, right? We get into COVID, and it was like no business for like 4 weeks or so, and then all of a sudden, it was the craziest market I have ever experienced in my 30 years. Doing it, okay? And all of a sudden, everybody's waving everything. As is, as is, as is. This is a new word. Well, frankly, every house is sold as is, right? The seller doesn't have to do anything. People always think, well, they have to do the termites. No, they don't. There is no law that says that the seller has to treat people with destroying assets. No. Now, does the seller really want to sell? Right? I mean, well, but if the buyer's getting a mortgage, they have to. The lender's going to require it. Okay. Well, if it's an FHA, I mean, again, I've been doing this 30 years. My practice is 99.9% residential real estate. Okay. Maybe 5 times in 30 years has a lender actually asked me for the registrar license certification on an FHA transaction. I mean, really. So, yeah, the seller does not use it to anything. Okay. But sometimes it's a good idea to negotiate a little bit because, to start all over, the carrying cost, mortgage, property taxes, carrying costs, whatever, you're probably beyond whatever the number is that the buyer's looking for anyway. Well, that's just what it's done, right? But now what I'm seeing of this crazy market is wording in paragraph 43 of the contract that the buyer waives all inspections except for, this always makes me laugh, structural, mechanical, and environmental. Is there anything else? Okay, so let's forget that one. I like that one. I think that's very clever. Go with it. That's a good one, right? We're all good with that one. That one you can put in. We're good with that. Okay. But what scares us is when we see waives all inspections or inspections are for informational purposes only. Okay, so what does that mean? Your buyer, first time home buyer, goes, does an inspection, finds out that the foundation is crumbling, the roof is leaking, there's an underground oil tank. Well, now he has the information. So we're buying the house, right? What do you think? Now we have a problem, right? It's the same thing as with people waive appraisal contingency and don't have the money to make up the difference or don't really want to make up the difference and they never actually pull that through, right? So a very difficult conversation that I always have to have with my buyers at the very beginning is, do you understand what you're waiving here? Okay, so if there's something wrong, or if the contract says waiving all inspections with the exception of structural and environmental, laws and website. Okay, so if there's something wrong with the plumbing, you're buying the house, right? Nothing too wiring, good, we're in. We're moving forward, right? Mold. We want this house, right? And people are like, well, no, I didn't. Of course, I want the electric to work and the plumbing to work. And I just had a deal die this morning because of that. Okay, so my client, true story, over 150,000 above asking. Okay, so they were the winning bid. They waived all inspections except for structural. Okay, inspections, all the others were for informational purposes only. Okay, this house has a septic, has an underground oil tank, and has a well. House is in a flood zone. Okay, there's water in the basement because of the sump pump failing. Okay, so I start talking to the client. I said, okay, so you're a builder. And I think we're a nice. I mean, I'm laughing with you guys. I'm talking about that. Are you a builder? Are you renovating this house? Are you not doing it down? What is your intention? Tell me your intention, because obviously, if they are doing the full cut, then who cares, right? It doesn't matter. What's your intention? Oh no, our lease is up. We need to move in. Well, so if you're waiving the septic inspection, what are you going to do if septic fails? You can't move in. The town will literally not allow you to move in. What are you going to do? And a septic can cost 30, 40, 50, depending on the size of the house. In Alpine, those cost 125,000, right? But I mean, what if the water isn't potable? What are you drinking? What are you showering with? What are you, it's like, oh, well, I thought that was all part of structural. Well, I gotta say, the seller is really fighting us on that, and it's not the other attorney. I work with him all the time. He's a lovely guy, and he gets it. He's like, but my people said they had 20 offers on this house. They accepted your offer because they waived everything with the exception of structural. They're not going to entertain anything electrical. They're not going to entertain anything else. Or the septic. So my people said, well, we can't buy the house. We can't take the chance. I even offered, let's do, and this sometimes works. Didn't work in this instance. Sometimes works. Let's do the inspection right now. Let's get an inspector here today, tomorrow. Let's just do this. Okay. And then they'll always say, oh, but we're not under contract yet. We haven't concluded attorney review. So what? Right? I mean, ladies, how many of you go out and buy a pair of shoes without trying them on? Right, gentlemen, your wives probably buy before you wear yourself. It's different because you're not wearing heels. But you wouldn't do that. So now you're going to invest in the biggest investment you're going to make, and you're not going to inspection and know what you're buying. And so the fear is what? That you're going to be out the $500 for the inspection? But you're paying $150,000 above asking? Let's put this into perspective, right? So I would be, and also what you have to be concerned about, when I recommend you to, if your client says, no, I've lost 10 houses already, it's okay, I want to waive inspections, I understand what this means. Get it in writing. Okay, now we have technology, we have email. Send them an email. Against my advice, you want me to be in the contract, that you're waiving all inspections, you step up, blah, 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 blah. Have them acknowledge that. For the realtor. Yeah. And you should get it signed then. Get it signed, make sure they know that they're signing it, because trust me, when we go over the contracts and we say you're putting down $10,000, they go, what? Who said that? Nobody told me that. You initially okay, so make sure they understand, make sure, maybe then attach that form that they signed to an email and put it in writing again. Just cover yourself because these are your friends, or you think they're your friends, you go out with them every day, you get to know them, right? But then they buy this house, they move into this house. There's an issue. They're going to turn around and they're going to say, well, my realtor said, or my attorney said, and all of a sudden nobody's present. Okay, so at least you can cover yourself and say, hey, no, look, I sent you this. I advised you against this. Okay, and you get some sort of protection. Okay? So I think we're supposed to keep it short.
Yeah, I mean, we'll just keep it a brief overview. We don't have to, I mean, this is a big topic we could get into, you know. I mean, I think the most important thing is that you guys understand and you're protecting yourself, but you're doing the best for your clients. And I think that's, do you have any advice for them as far as when they're counseling their buyers to make offers that, you know, will either, you know, make look better on paper, but also.
I love, like I said before, I love it when realtors put in that phrase. You know, buyers waive inspections with the exception of structural, mechanicals, and environmental. Sellers are like, oh, you're waiving inspections. Like, no, they're not. What else is there? The scratch on the floor, they're letting that go. Yeah, but yeah, that's great. Sellers don't understand, and they really do think that you're waiving, and they're going to consider that offer paper.
I like that.
Yeah, and that's
Hazardous, 'cause it's a
yeah,
nice word.
safety, everything.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
throw in everything other than you just
Except
said.
for-
Except for everything.
All right, good. So we can, again, if you have questions at the end, we'll kind of go over anything more specific. So Fawad, why don't you go next? And Fawad's going to talk about use and occupancy and just some of the things that are happening, you know, around that.
So you guys heard of what a use and occupancy is? Everybody know generally what it means? So use and occupancy is basically prior to the closing or after the closing, one party is going to occupy the property, right? So it can go both ways. It's not just sellers staying in the property, but it can also be buyers that need to move into a property prior to the closing. So it's basically you're granting them use and occupancy of the house, right? Whoever owns it, whether it's buyers after the closing or sellers prior to the closing. So, you know, we've been seeing a lot of that lately right now as well, because sellers, it's a hot seller's market, sellers can demand whatever they want, right? So sellers have been demanding that buyers buy the property, let them stay so they can find their next property or move out at their convenience. So we've seen a lot of that. So there's a couple of aspects of use and occupancy that are critical. One is to have a defined term, right? You gotta have a move out date. You gotta have it. It's usually, if it's, let's say, a seller that's going to stay in the property, it starts from the day of the closing, and then it's got to have an end date. And then you also have to have the cost fees associated with it. Normally, it's carrying costs, right? It's whoever owns a property. So in the case that the seller stays, the buyer's carrying costs minus their principal, right? So buyers always assume I'm just going to take my mortgage payment and divide it by 30, and that's my carrying cost, right? Seller's not going to pay you to pay down your principal on your mortgage, right? So it's usually insurance, interest, taxes, and that's pretty much what your carrying costs are, and that's what you're going to get paid as a per diem by the party that's staying. The other aspect of it is a holdover penalty, right? So, you know, there's going to be a defined period that the seller will stay in the property, but if they stay beyond that, there's usually a penalty amount, which is considerably higher than what the original per diem is, right? The point of that is to incentivize the seller to make sure that they leave on time, right? Because otherwise, and typically, you know, if let's say your initial per diem is $100, $120, $150, the penalty may be around $300, right? So you want to make sure the seller doesn't just consider it as like, all right, you know, I'll just stay a little bit extra, I'll buy more time. You want to make sure that they'll pay financially for it, right? Another aspect is escrow. You gotta always make sure you have an escrow held by the seller. And the amount of the escrow always depends on usually the duration of the use and occupancy, right? If it's a short use and occupancy, maybe only a couple of days, not a short escrow. Nowadays, sometimes, especially at this time of year, we see a lot of sellers that want to sell now but stay till the school year, right? So we're talking about a couple of months. You want to make sure that there is enough escrow because you want to The point of the escrow is to cover any overstay and to cover any damages that sellers may cause while living there or while. So those things need to be in there. And the most critical point that every attorney puts into a use and occupancy is language regarding there's no tenancy rights established here, right? The seller that's remaining is simply a licensee. There's no landlord-tenant relationship form because you don't want that. That's a whole bag of worms that no seller, no buyer wants to get into. The seller doesn't leave on time. What that means is if they're a licensee, the license can be revoked by the other party at a certain time, and we don't need to go through a whole eviction proceeding like you normally would with a tenant. So that's very important. Then there's also hold harmless and indemnities that are provided. That if the seller, even though the buyer owns the property, if the seller happens to trip and fall and get hurt, they're not going to hold the buyer responsible for that. And if their guess, same thing happens there, it's the seller's liability. They're going to hold the buyer hold harmless for that, and insurance will go along with that, right? If you buy a property, you've got to get homeowners insurance, but the seller that's going to stay is going to also get a renter's or a liability policy that's going to name the buyer as a loss payee, which is also very important. So you got to always make sure those things are in order whenever you do this. And another thing important for you guys is that there will, even though there is a use and occupancy seller will stay, there will always be a final walkthrough before the closing, right? Because you need to establish what the condition of the house is on the day of the closing. Because the house, when the seller leaves, whether it's a week from now or 3 months from now, needs to be in roughly that same condition, except where more wear and tear. So yes, even though there's no keys being handed over, there's no possession being handed over, you still need to do a final walkthrough so you know what the condition is. If there's a hole in the wall, if there's any issues, that needs to be brought up on the day, on that time of closing, so it's addressed, whether it's credit or repairs or whatever it is. So when it comes time for the seller to leave, it was like that before we bought the property. So that's very, very important for you as realtors to make sure that your buyers still do a walkthrough even though they're not in possession of the house. And then essentially at the end of the term, as long as the seller leaves on time, goes for property, keys are exchanged, that's done, everything is okay at the property. Then a message just gets sent to the attorneys that we did the walkthrough, possession was handed over, everything is good at the property, and then the escrow gets released. Now, if there are any issues, the point of the escrow is to address the issues, right? So each party, the buyer would have to walk through, provide evidence, hey, there was this hole in the wall, was there before we did a walk, get estimates and stuff, that will get paid out on the escrow. Same thing for the holdover. If there's any holdover, if the seller stays a week past the original deadline, then the penalty kicks in per day, and that will get paid out to the buyer from the escrow. So those are the essential points that we use in occupancy. I just had one right now. We did the closing last month, and the seller staying there until the end of June. We generally don't like use in occupancy, right? Because we'll have closed, and we're still working on it, right? So we generally don't like use in occupancy, but we do understand that it's a necessary evil, or it's a necessary item, especially in today's market. So in light of that, I just want to make sure that it's all done correctly, that everybody's protected, both buyer and seller, and that the proper provisions and safeguards are put in place to protect the buyer, with the seller.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's a common theme, right? Protecting yourself, protecting your buyers. That's really good.
Yeah, that's what our job is, right? Protect the parties, right? That's why you go to an attorney. So it's just for you guys, it's important to keep that stuff in mind as well. That if your buyer, the seller asks for it, right? Seller says, hey, what, fine, I'll take your offer, but I want to stay in the property for 2 months afterwards, right? In some cases, that'll give you the edge over other buyers in terms of getting your offer accepted. So you just want to make sure your client understands what that means, right? Sure, I buy the property, the seller stays, how does that look like? So you just want to make sure every property is nice for buyers. And like I said, if the situation is right and it falls apart, the parties are okay with it, there's nothing wrong with it, and like I said, give you an edge. To my client, in this case, it was a hot property in Colster. They had multiple offers, but my client was willing to let them stay till the end of June so the kids finish school, and that gave them the edge over other offers. Just something to keep in mind. Your buyer shouldn't steer away from it, but it's something that you keep in your back pocket as a tool to make your offer accepted. these calls for.
Yeah, and it's also important, we're obviously talking about buyer stuff here, but you guys are all dating listings and stuff too. So you got to really understand, when you do receive an offer that has this in there, what that means, so you can explain it to your sellers as well. So, it's kind of making the circle around in that regard. So that's awesome.
Yeah, if you have a seller that has that concern, right? Look, I got to sell this property before I buy another one. How am I going to juggle both at the same time? You can present that as an option for them. Like, look, the property's in demand. We can request buyers. We can even put that in the listing. That seller would like to remain for 2 months after the close. That can give your seller some comfort in moving forward with the sale, knowing that, all right, I'll have some time. I can close and then take my time in closing on my next transaction. I don't need to do everything on the same day that I'm selling that property. So that's a good tool to have if that's a concern on each side.
Awesome. All right, finally, batting cleanup. We're gonna have one talk about short sales.
I hope I didn't get picked this topic, but I'm sure it's one.
It may have been some of the subconscious.
I don't know who to blame here. It's funny. The short sale, there's whole classes, about short sale, all day classes, because it's very complicated. I think probably within the last 2 years, the amount of short sales have dipped significantly. And that's really because they're a marketability byproduct. And what that means is that if you remember anything, just remember subject to third party approval. That's what you got to remember out of short sale. The reason why is because here, the only difference is that the lender, the current lender on the property, the seller's mortgage, that company is agreeing to accept less at closing than they are legally entitled to, right, per their note. So as a result, legally for us, it's the same type of transaction, other than that statement, it's subject to third party approval. Because when it comes to time of closing, the payoff is going to be modified by that level. Okay. Now, the reason why there's one type of classes is because each lender has their own type of process for it. So what I want to do is kind of give you a little bit of the realtor perspective of it. The reason why is because there's a lot of players when it comes to the short sale, right? You have the seller, you have the seller's bank now that's involved. You have the seller's attorney, you have the buyer, you have the buyer's attorney, you have the listing agent, you have the buyer's agent. You may even have a servicer of that loan. You may have a collection company that's involved with getting that payment back. And you may even have an attorney for that lender who hasn't been paid in probably a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. Okay. So there's a lot of moving parts in the short sales. So once you know the players, you kind of get to where it starts. So one of the players is called the negotiator. Has anyone heard of a negotiator? It's a really cool title. But what they do is really they negotiate sometimes in between the parties, which is either the seller and as well as the bank or whoever is representing the bank, which could be a multitude of different type of companies, like I said, a servicer, a collections company, or a law firm. So what they do is they try to get to that payoff number. What number will you accept that everyone else can get paid, and then that you can use that debt for whatever you want when it comes to tax season next year, your profit and loss. And that's the only reason why banks allow this, because they can use that because they're not making money off it. They're actually going to write it off. Okay. So now that's the basis for it. Now I wrote some notes just because it's very complicated. When it comes to potential listing, now obviously as a buyer, you can't get a short sale, but again, all you're doing is waiting for that subject to third approval, right? But as a listing agent, I want to focus on the process that I should be made aware of. And it's really focusing on finding out who's that correct representative of the lender or the seller's lender. Who's going to make that determination as to we accept $7 instead of 10 at closing. Okay. Additionally, it's important to know who the sellers are, right? And that's really a problem because I'm sure everyone's noticed that when it comes to closing, you may have 2 people on the note or 1 person on the mortgage, right? So now it's like you got to find out essentially who has to sign this deed to make it legally enforceable and filed and accepted by the clerk of the county. So as a result, you need to find out who they are. Now, not only are we talking about an outstanding mortgage, right? We have to produce that amount. There are also other implications, right? I call it the unknowns. And this is why I think it took me. I just clicked. This is where a limited title search is very important in short sales. All right, because not only do you want to find out what any or if there are any liens on the property, especially UCC violations or any other liens, with respect to sewer bills, with respect to taxes. You also want to do the searches on the actual sellers, whoever's on title, because presumably we're doing a short sale because they haven't paid this loan for probably a couple of years. I've seen up to like 8 years sometimes. It's crazy. Sometimes I've seen 6 months. So it always depends on the bank. So presumably, if they haven't paid that, there may be some other debts they haven't paid either, right? So now if we go into the property, lien on the property to look at if there's a sewer bill, right? If that's not included in the taxes for that property, there may be some additional liens. The most significant one I see is solar panels, which again could be another topic for another day, solar panels, correct? But there could be outstanding money owed, and those are liens on the property. That means you cannot convey clear title to this buyer. And for us as attorneys, all we want to give is clear title. And obviously for title insurance, you're going to require that, and their lender is going to require that as well. So that's why we do a limited title search to say, let's find out what else. Let's get these unknowns so that if we have to add that to the price, we add it now. We don't add it at the end, right? When we're about to close, we got a payoff figure, but now it's a $20,000 debt that has to be paid off. And you're like, wait a minute, where did this come off? Just could have resolved that issue way before, right? And normally these are obviously cheaper. Sometimes you try to give deals where say, we'll do this for it. If the buyer wants to use these searches for a policy, that's already paid off, those part of the searches. I haven't talked to him about that, but I just gave him a discount, right? Knowing. But presumably those searches are the same ones that are going to be used, right? So once you get all those, you get to that final number. And now is like kind of where you start to dance of inspections, right? You start to dance of the contract provisions. And really, again, you have to look at the nature of the transaction. Here, you may have a seller that doesn't care. No one's kicking me out, right? I'm not paying anybody for several years. So they're probably not going to do any inspection issues. They're not going to address anything. They're not going to do anything. So this is as true as is as you get, right? When it comes to U&O, this is a particularly sensitive topic because there's mostly documents, if the short sale is approved, it's called arm's length transaction, okay? And it's very important, very, very important because all those parties I told you about, they all have to sign that document in front of the notary. And what that says, generally speaking, is that I don't know anyone related to this transaction. I'm not related to them, familial, either business or through family. And lastly, I'm not making any money outside of what's in this closing statement. The reason why I say this is important is because I've seen litigation now where they're coming after me for that. So there are sellers that sell it to, my niece and my cousin or my third cousin has a different last name, just to get that mortgage satisfied, sell it, I make money off it, you get it, and I continue to live there. And everything's the same, right? But that's fraud. It's exactly what that is, fraud. You're frauding the bank. And banks are coming after it. So that's what happened a couple years ago. So I just want to, before I get too really into the issue, because I can talk about this for hours. It's crazy. It's crazy and it's fun, and you got to like what you do, right? Because I do. And when it comes to the closing part, you got to be, as a listing agent, you want to be able to set everyone's expectations. So you got to let them know up front that this offer you're getting, you have to send it to the bank. They have to review it. They have to accept it, and they may even try to change it. Right? They may even increase the price that we're not accepting that. That attorney fee that you have there, we're not paying them. Your fee of 6%, we're paying 5%, 4%, whatever they want. And it's up to them, right? So what I mean by that expectation is that it generally takes a little bit more time. You should put that it's a short sale up front in whatever listing you have. And what that means is that there's been some verification that the value of the property is substantially less than what's owed in the property currently. So it's going to be a loss of money. So essentially, the seller is not getting any money unless there's some type of relocation fees that's allowed by this approval process. Okay. So those are many steps of it, but the way I looked at it is I try to break it down is for realtors is to really try to get a mortgage statement, the most recent one that they have, and don't be surprised if it's a couple years old, because they just take the current one and they just throw it away. They're like, if no one's going to take me out, who cares? Secondly is get the borrower's information, date of birth, social security number. These lenders will not do anything without some type of authorization, either directly from the borrower or someone that has power to make that decision. We could call them as attorneys. We could say, we're an attorney in the state of New Jersey. They'll say, we don't. Without your authorization, we're not giving you any information. Because they can enforce, right? They can seek the acceleration of the mortgage. They can enforce it, and they can get their own foreclosure and sell their own property. And then lastly, of course, limited title search. And like I said, in your actual multiple listings, disclose the fact that it is a short sale. There will be time. The seller's not going to do anything, right? True as is. And I would always stay away from U&Os in those circumstances. It's not allowed. And again, I did make something. I'm going to email it to you. Maybe you can email it to everybody. It just has some bullet points about it because I think it's a lot of, this is going to come back up again very soon. This is something that happened maybe 2 years ago. It's very prevalent in the market now with the spike in the increase or the spike in the prices. No one's going for this. But now you have a spike in the interest rate. You have a spike in property taxes that people were unaware of. And also you have a lot of COVID loan modifications that people had no idea what they were signing, right? Like something happens, I don't know what, and now I just got a foreclosure, right? So no one told me what this means. I was like, well, you should have signed, right? But they said I couldn't pay for a year. I was like, well, what you think was free, right? So normally what happens is you got to pay within a year, and that year, everything you owe for that year is due. And if you don't pay it, you're in breach. And if you're in breach, I can accelerate the mortgage. Right now, with high market prices, as a lender, I'll take the property. Why not, right? That's why I did this mortgage in the first place. So I do think this is going to come back up again. When it comes to these negotiators, the only difference is that they've taken a longer class than this. And secondly, is that the familiarity with whoever's dealing with that lender, right? Whoever knows who they are. But I think it's something that's going to come back up. I think the increased property tax, everyone's getting stumped by those, and I knew that was going to happen. When you have people that have been living in property for 30 years, they sell it for double that they bought it for, taxes are going to go up, and they're going up. So and currently now, a lot of municipalities are thirsty for money. So that's how they get it. So I think, again, because of the low interest rates before, people overextend themselves as well. They said, I'll borrow a little bit more if I'm getting a 2 or 2.5. And then the tax increase, which is dollar for dollar increase on your mortgage payment, it just breaks the back. So I do think this is going to come up. I think it's very important to keep a lookout. And a lot of people are surprised when they're like, wait a minute, you owe this much money? Oh, I haven't paid it in a year, but it's okay. I think the listing agent is important to say how much you owe, who's your lender, can we see the mortgage statement? And for a buyer's agent, you know, if you see the short sale, just be able to manage your client's expectations of how long it may be. They may get a bargain. I don't know to what extent, but if they wait enough, they could get a property at a reduced value.
Awesome.
That's much.
That's the abridged version of
That's
the
it.
short sale.
Yeah,
I mean,
the short sale version. And again, I'll send this out to everybody to kind of give yourselves an idea of it. But I do think this is something to keep in mind now.
Yeah, I mean, now is the time, right, to educate yourself, start to get really comfortable with that for the future. So as, you know, as proficient and as, you know, good of an understanding as you can have, it's going to make you that much more effective to capitalize on grabbing those listings, getting those, you know, getting those things for your clients. So this is the time to do it. So if he'll obviously email that stuff out to us, but, you know, feel free to reach out for a one-on-one, you know, they can take you to lunch or something, you know, whatever. But if you really want to learn more about it.
Any questions you have before you get into something you're not aware of, just call us. I mean, call us, email us. I'd rather take care of it before than after. You know, you know, I have no problem dealing with problems. That's what we deal with. But if we could fix it, you know, earlier, it's much better for everyone.
Yeah, and on those title searches, you know, if you're going that road, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to do that for our, you know, Keller Williams agents, where it's a service we like to be able to offer. And again, it's dealing with the problems before they become a problem. Let's get out in front of it. You know what I mean? Let's do the best we can for your clients. And the more everybody is aware of what's on the table, the easier we can work towards a goal. So that's, you know, that's something that's really important. And you know, we had 3 attorneys speak on 3 different topics, but all 3 of them are well versed in any of these topics. So, you know, feel free, you know, you develop a relationship with them, comfortable, you know, bring them your questions, you know, bring them your buyers. You know, that's really important. So I want to thank everybody. That was really great. Do we have any questions? Questions on what we went over? Do we have pizza and food here, so we could talk you know, a little bit more about that afterwards. So, all right, awesome.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you again.
Thank
you, everyone.
With the short sales, they have to actually have an upgrade for it to be approved first before you.
Generally, yeah. I mean, the banks won't, and sometimes they want a loan modification application done before that too. So they want to be able to justify that. We can only sell it to you because you can definitely not pay for it. And you, I mean the seller, right? So that's one step, but it always depends on the lender. Some lenders may apply or accept it. You know, smaller banks, hard money lenders, smaller banks that we're aware of here in New Jersey, like they may be quicker at saying, all right, if you give me this number, we'll just go through with it. And then you just have a number to deal with. And if you get me more above that, then we'll pay you more. That's the incentive on your end. And that could work. But generally, no, generally they want an offer before, you know, they want any type of consideration of it.
When you see in the listing that a lender has already approved 250, for example, but it's still on the market, should you trust that or?
I would ask for the approval letter. I think it should be important to see that because it may have expired. I mean, they set deadlines by a month. So if I approve it for 30 days, it's not an open type of situation because of the fluctuations in this market that we're in. Things change rapidly, right?
A lot of times the approvals are specific to buyers.
Right. They just apply. You can't transfer. You can't sign it. So that's why it's important to say I would be very worried if they had that in the listing. Yeah.
Because I've seen it.
They may, and it may be a situation like I mentioned, a smaller bank, smaller hard money lender who says I want this money, no matter what, when, where. If I get that money, I'll make my money for it. So it could be the case depending on the property. If it's going to be bought, not. But I would always ask to see that first before you waste your time or your client's time.
Sometimes we'll have a realtor list that because they may have had a prior approval with a higher buyer, and that deal fell through for whatever reason. So they know that the bank was previously able to accept this amount. So if they submit it again at this amount, they'll most likely accept it. That doesn't mean it's already approved. Right?
No.
Yeah, you mentioned, so when getting, working with the seller to list their short sale, you mentioned doing the title search before listing. Does the seller have to pay for that search?
No, they're not required to. I think for your own due diligence, you know, to protect your license, to protect your time, I think it's worth $250, $400. You know,
You're gonna charge for that, sir?
that's something we'll talk about. But generally, no. So the reason why, I mean, there's other mechanisms that you could search the background. So for example, you could search, you know, the county records to see if there's any lien, right? That you'll probably find that mortgage. You could do a UCC search quickly, but that doesn't protect you in recent transactions, right? 3 is you could search names, but that, again, that doesn't give you the full time frame. So it's not required. I think it definitely covers and will protect your time in the future. But again, look at the nature of the transaction. If the seller has to pay the mortgage, they're not going to say, hey, Alicia, here's $400. You know what I mean?
Go find that out.
Right. So again, it's on you, and hopefully you have the partners that we have, right, that can really help us move these transactions to closing where we want to be, you know? Because again, if you get that and you cross these items off, it makes the transaction that much smoother. And generally what I see, banks will give you 5-6%. They get it. There's no concern with that, you know?
So can I say Justin did the search for me and charge me later after I spoke?
So I think the legal answer is that, and I'll defer to counsel here.
Yeah.
For us, we have to invoice for the search. So what we do is we do a search for judgments, current owner search, and we do it with no examination and no typing. So we just give you the raw data, and it's like literally just handwritten on paper, just so you could have it. That keeps the cost down, but technically we do have to invoice for it. always 100% enforce and go, start knocking on doors to collect it. Again, we can talk about this. I'm being recorded on.
Yeah. Yeah, so regarding that, sometimes there may be transactions where, that'll be offered to a buyer, right? Like if you had run title with Carnegie and you have, that gets offered to the buyer, the buyer side, say, look, title's already been run, why don't you use Carnegie and, it's already ready to go, they can just issue a commitment immediately to you, that'll speed things up. Especially since short sale approvals have a short time frame, right? You want them to be able to, once you get the approval, you need to move quick to close. So oftentimes, if you did do a pre-lit title search with Carnegie, you can offer that to the buyer's agent or to the buyers, say, hey, look, it's already been run, here's their contact, here's their initial report, you can go with them, it's already ready to go.
Right, and in addition, because I'm not sure how much of you know about short sales, but the thing is, if you just submit the package to short sale lender preliminary HUD with just your fee, your commission, and the what's left over to pay off that mortgage and nothing else. And then it turns out there's 3 judgments or a tax lien, HOA fees always come up and everything, and you didn't account for that. Now you waited, you spent 3, 4, 5 months getting this approval. You get the approval, now you run title, now you find out about all of this. You have to go back and start from the beginning and submit everything with all these figures that you weren't aware of. It's definitely worth it.
Paper pictures and all that anyway, but not.
Because those buyers that were willing to wait as long as it took, they're not anymore.
You're exactly right. The timing is perfect for everyone else.
Anybody else? We're good? All right, so we will send out some information, make sure that we get you all the contact information from our attorneys. Do want to thank everybody, you guys for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come and be with us here, and also the Market Center staff, Alicia, Christian, they really did work to put this all together for you. They did pick up the food, so they're going to bring that in now, so just thank them separately when you see them. But again, thanks for coming to this. And in the future, if you have any other specific topics you want us to do one of these for like next month, bring those to me and let me know what you want to learn about. We'll try to really detail and have these things be specific to what you guys want to learn. So we're here for you guys. So
Yeah, I would say you guys are in the trenches. You guys know. I feel bad for agents because when you have to evaluate a property, it's like insane to do that right now, right? So you guys in the trenches, tell us, we'll talk about it. Yeah, as much as we can.
yeah, awesome. Well, thank you again. Thanks, everybody.
So, of course,
I know.
Every single time. What are these?